Okay, year 10. We want to continue with the those winter Sundays analysis, and we want to turn our attention to the theme of love and the relationship between the father and son in this poem. And what we want to point out specifically is that the poet is making a really strong point about how the father expresses love in this poem in a way that he doesn't recognize. And so, one thing that you want to do is think about when you picture or you hear the word love, you want to think about like the immediate images that come to your mind. You want to think about the immediate sort of scenarios, or if you're going to think about how you would imagine somebody showing love to another person, what comes to mind. Okay, so you want to jot those ideas down because that the contrast is what's important. We often will think about either like some kind of romantic love, or when you think of love, or if you're thinking about it in a child parent child parent relationship, you might think of a parent hugging their child, a parent, listening to the child and wiping away tears, or you might think about sweet, messages in your lunchbox from your mom, or some kind of, gifts that maybe your parents give you, or whatever. Okay, but this poem is about the contrast between what we might sort of expect love to look like and what the father's love looks like in this poem. And so when we talk about the final line, I'm talking about this description right here: love's austere and lonely offices. Okay, when he describes love being an austere and lonely office, that's how he's describing this job that the dad does on Sunday mornings. He selflessly, okay, the dad could very well be well within his rights to say, look, I get up every day, I work hard, my body aches, and I work in the weather every day of the week. Sunday I get to sleep in, okay? He would be, that would be totally understandable, okay? But the father chooses, and like it's almost like by using the word austere, it's like a discipline. Like it's a strict duty, or standard that he holds himself to, where he says, nope, Sundays I get up, I face the cold, and I get the fire started, and I do that for my family. And specifically here, the focus is the poet, so it's something he does so that the son doesn't. I mean, he could easily ask a young man, a son, to do this job. Yeah, get fires going in the morning. You get up, you do it. But he does it for the son and for the family. Okay, so that they don't have to face this really harsh cold. And so that's what's austere about this job that the dad does. Okay, this office. Okay, and it's lonely work too, because you don't have to have two people get up to do this. You don't have to do it together. But it's sort of this lone soldier, facing this duty in the dark and on his own and in the cold. Okay, and what he's saying is, I didn't know love could look like that. I didn't know. I didn't recognize that as love. Okay, and so what we want to do is talk about the effects that creates, that line, but it's going to come into play here with these phrases that we're going to look at that talk about the father-son relationship. I've already selected these for you. I mean, you certainly could go through and find these yourself, but when we look at these phrases that really address the relationship between them, we want to, first of all, be able to find quotes that address or talk about how they relate to one another. And we want to be able to name the device, the poetic device or the literary device that the poet is using. But you want to spend some time thinking about the effects created through the language choices, through the poetic device choice, or the form choices. Okay, so the quotes that I've chosen here are "No one ever thanked him," and that is an example of caesura. Click back here. It's the strongest use of caesura in the poem. It is the only full stop that you find breaking a line in this poem. There's very little punctuation within the lines. You have a couple commas, but this is the strongest use of it in the poem. And what it does is really causes the reader to stop and take notice of this. He's also placed it at the end of the first stanza. Also gives it builds up after all this selfless stuff that the dad does for everybody. Bammo, nobody thanks him. Okay, and I possibly said this before, but the no one and ever, really strong language choices, like absolutely nobody thanked him, including the son. Okay, so after all this stuff he does, this really doing it for others, or, taking a hit for everybody. I mean, I'm sure he enjoys the heat too, but he does it, and nobody ever says thank you. Nobody is appreciative. Okay, so when we talk about writing effects, you want to look at the language choices within it, but you also want to comment on the use of caesura and the short, blunt sentence that it is. Okay, and when you consider that all the other lines leading up to it is all one sentence, okay, so like 4.5 lines, and then this 5-word sentence, no one ever thanked him. Okay, it's really blunt, and that it makes the truth of it even harsher, I guess. That like, wow. Okay, so the fact that to be stated so simply, to be placed at the end, to have the caesura causing you to pause before reading it, sets it apart and emphasizes it, and it leaves you with this thought at the end of the first stanza. And it's it's honest. It's kind of like a confession. Like, yeah, he did that for us, and we never said thanks. Ugh. That's harsh, man. Okay, and I mean, he doesn't say never, but he says ever, and it has the same effect. That not once. Okay, and so, but yet he did it Sunday after Sunday. Okay, week after week, maybe probably year after year. All right. And so you want to be able to, when you're making comments like this, you want to look at all of those aspects: the language choices, where it's placed, and grammar that's there, and how is he emphasizing? What is he emphasizing? What's he showing us through this choice that he's made? Okay, moving on to father-son relationship shown in fearing the chronic angers of that house. Fear is a strong emotive word, as is anger. And then we add in chronic, and we've got the idea that basically the way he's describing the atmosphere in their home is one of constant anger. Okay, there's a lot of strife in this house. There's a lot of tension. People don't get along. It's not a place you go to feel at peace. Okay, it's not a place where maybe you even feel safe. Okay, he and we see that he responds to the father because of fear. Okay, and fearing the chronic angers of the house. It's like he's nervous or he's scared of the next blow up, the next shouting, the next however the dad expresses anger, and we don't know necessarily who the dad is always expressing the anger. Is it at everybody? Is it at the son? By using the word that house, it makes it feel like it's more than just the dad who's angry, um, but it doesn't say. But by using that house, it's a kind of vague, ambiguous reference to the vibe, the atmosphere in their home. But it definitely is referring to the dad. Okay, the dad is part of it, and maybe the key to it. Maybe it's the dad's anger that is most feared, and you don't want to make dad mad, so you do what he says. But that's a hard way to live. Okay, and he tells us that this is the atmosphere he grew up in. And this tells us, reveals their relationship to the reader. Okay. So you want to think about what effects comments you could make about that, because you're definitely going to use it in the essay. Okay. Next up, for showing relationship between the father and son is speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold. And it goes on to say, and polish my good shoes too. And the device here that we're really looking at that you want to comment on is the contrast or the juxtaposition, that he confesses that he spoke indifferently to the father. And then right after that, he says, who had driven out the cold. Okay, like when I get up and I come downstairs after I've gotten dressed or whatever, come out into the living room or wherever the dad is, that when he interacts with the dad, it's with this indifferent and can't be bothered kind of attitude. Okay, it's not the response from a son who sees that the dad has selflessly gotten up and provided warmth for him, and even polished his shoes for him. He doesn't respond to him like, thanks, Dad. Wow, what a nice thing that you've done for me. I really appreciate you, Dad. Oh, big hug. That kind of stuff. It's this cold, non-engaged way of relating to the father. And it shows us that there is not a closeness between the two of them, even though the poet sees now that what it's a striking thing that he would be so indifferent and non-engaging and non-emotional with someone who's demonstrating love in his own way, who's doing kind things for him. So we get the idea that this fear and this anger is making it really difficult for him to respond here with gratitude and respond to a form of love. Okay, that it's hard to see this love that the dad is showing because of all the other tension, fear, and anger and frustration that he's living under. Okay, remember the chronic is really important here. That is like constant. Okay, it's an all the time thing. Okay, and so this is the speaking indifferently to him is the mode of relation, that the son has adopted. This is how he speaks to the dad. This is how he relates to the dad, because of the fear, probably. And I'm going to guess, to some degree, some resentment and anger of his own. Okay. And when you're angry with someone and they try to do something nice for you after they've maybe done a lot of horrible things to you, it makes it really hard to appreciate it and see it. And I think that's really what he's trying to say. Is that it's like, whoa, too clouded over with the other stuff. Okay. But we get this really emotive final two lines, and I know it's all the whole last two lines here is what did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? So first off, it's we've got some repetition. What did I know? He could have just said, what did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? And it would have sounded more I would say kind of like flippant or almost like, how could I? Yeah, I was a kid. How did I know? And so, like, one of those kind of feels like that part, like, how could I as a child know this? But repeating it twice, you really get the sense of, like, uh, that the regret that's coming through. Like, how could I know? I didn't see it. Ah, man. I was only a kid. I mean, I was only a kid, but I was only a kid. Okay? Like, it's both. It's like I was too young and confused and angry myself to be able to see it. But in his own way, he was showing me love and I missed it. Okay? It's really emotional, you guys. Like, really emotional, I think. It talks about a broken relationship that the poet regrets. And he's talking through his hurt here too. Um, anyway, um, and then of course we've already kind of talked about this austere and lonely office. That love in the way that his dad showed love was facing the cold, doing it on his own, and again we get this idea that he's relating with someone who is austere and possibly lonely. Okay, and maybe it's out of his own making, the dad's loneliness. He's kind of a grouchy, angry, volatile character. Probably people leave him alone. If he's super strict and has all these high standards that nobody meets, yeah, he's people probably give him a lot of space, okay? But the way he shows love, the poet realizes later on, is through these acts of service, of doing things like starting the fire when he could have slept in. Well, okay, it's yeah, and the fact that he leaves us with the question, the effect too is he has to sit with that question himself too, and it's kind of unanswered. Yeah, I mean, how could he know? How could he see that love when there's all this other fear and anger and tension going on? How could he see that? How could he hear it? How could he feel it from the Father? And it's a sad, emotional, you might say poignant, regretful feeling that because it's how he leaves us, we think, oh, wow, um, yeah, there's a lot of hurt there, and it's an unsettling effect. It's a we it's a realization that we miss things, that because we're broken human beings, we don't relate well to each other, and um, and in his own sort of austere and lonely way, the dad's trying to show love, and the son never recognized it till much later on, possibly. Okay. Okay. I know that's very emotive, but it's an emotive poem. So the last part of this that I want to make sure that you understand is this form and structure idea that is possible. Okay, I'm not saying this is it. Okay, it could not. This may well not have been, Robert Hayden's intention, but I think it's a really interesting interpretation, and if we can support it, then we can offer it as an interpretation. And I think there's a lot of really powerful meaning created through this. So there's the idea that this 14-line poem is possibly a sonnet in disguise. Okay, sonnets are a really well-known, old-fashioned type of love poem. Okay, you can spot them right off normally because they've got 14 lines. If you look at a poem and you think, especially if it's all one block of text, it's about 14 lines. You count them up, and you're like, and you notice certain things about the a sonnet when you see it. Okay, there's some real markers for it. They usually have a rhyme scheme. A lot of them have regular meter, and a lot of times either it'll, like I said, it'll be all grouped together in 14 lines, but there will be this pattern that marks off either the octave and the sestet, or the three quatrains and the couplet at the end. Either way, you still kind of have a group of 8 and 6 lines, and usually there's a sense of question or problem being presented in the beginning, and a solution or an answer in the second half or in the sestet. Okay, so if indeed this is a sonnet that doesn't look like a sonnet, what meaning could we take from that? Okay, here's a picture of a Shakespearean sonnet where you can, it's all very fancy written out, but it's about love. It's got all the things that it needs to have. It's got the rhyme scheme. It's got the regular meter, and it's about love. Okay, and a sort of raising a question type problem and giving a response in the end. What we see in this poem is that instead of a normal 14 lines, octet and sestet, start with a problem, end with an answer, he's kind of gone and broken it up in different places. So first off, you don't recognize that it's a sonnet because it's got 5, 4, 5. Okay, so it doesn't have a rhyme scheme. It doesn't have regular meter, and most of all, it leaves us with a question. Instead of solving a question or solving a problem, it leaves us with a problem. Okay, a big emotional problem. But it is about love. Okay, but it's about love that's not recognized as love when given. Okay, and therefore, this is a really powerful message that could be coming through his form and structure choices by making this kind of look like a in disguise sonnet. Sonnets are about love. There's this idea that we don't recognize this as a sonnet and a poem about love, because that's the same way he experienced his dad's love. He didn't recognize it when he saw it. It looked different than he expected. He couldn't see it at the time, and it leaves him with this big kind of haunting question at the end. I have this kind of list spelled out here. I know it's a lot if you're trying to get these notes down, so you probably have to pause it. But the idea is that possibly he chose to write a sonnet but not follow the traditional form to go along with his meaning of that sometimes love doesn't always look the way we think it should or will. Sometimes we're looking right at love and we don't see it, or we can't hear it, or understand it because of other factors. Okay, I think it's a big part of this. The relationship with his dad is he didn't, because of all the other emotional stuff, he didn't receive or hear or see the love when it was given. And that the idea is that he sees it and recognizes it now as an adult, but he didn't when he was a kid. So really sad. Okay, but powerful meaning that you can interpret from his structure choices. Okay, now I'm not saying I interviewed Robert Hayden. He's like, oh, yep, that's what I was thinking. But I think there's a really strong interpretation point here. Okay, that it's a poem about love, but a poem about unrecognized love. And so he makes his sonnet form unrecognized until you sort of dig in, look, and have a think about it. Okay. Just here at the end of this video, I want to make sure to include the set question for this week. How does Hayden vividly portray the relationship between the speaker and the father in his poem, Those Winter Sundays? And of course, the normal length for the essay. You want to follow the same instructions as the essay for Plenty. You can go back and rewatch the video or look back at your notes about how to write an introduction and what my expectations for every PEE paragraph is, and how to write a conclusion. All that still stands for this poem, for this essay for this poem. And I haven't showed this in the video yet, so I just want to have it in a video, even if you've got it already in your notes from class session. There's another video about, sort of going through the poem and analyzing and coming up with these points. But these, I've just got these phrased so you possibly could use these as your point statements. Okay, these aren't the only 4 to use, and you're not obligated to use these, but it's a resource to get you going in the right direction. So the question is, how is the relationship between the speaker and the father vividly portrayed? You could look at him using the non-traditional sonnet form to demonstrate how the speaker didn't recognize the father's form of love when he was young, and then you could write a whole paragraph about the meaning that you can find and relate it to the meaning found in the poem, that the father expresses love in a non-traditional, non-expected way that the son doesn't interpret, doesn't recognize when he's a kid. So the father, and this is, this is talking about their relationship. The father expresses love in a way that the son doesn't receive or hear or see or feel. Okay, and that it's like a miscommunication. Yeah, like the father speaking love in a language that the son doesn't hear for whatever reason. And like we said before, the reasons may very well be the strife that's in the house. Okay. Another point that you could discuss is Hayden creates a vivid picture of the cold the father drove out for his children as a form of love. Okay. This order that I have isn't necessarily the order to do them in. Okay. I'm already thinking you want to put these in a logical, like one would build to the next one. Okay. And another one would be Hayden portrays the cold emotions between the father and child that complicate their relationship. And that's when you can talk about the non-appreciation, the indifference, and then, of course, the fear and the anger. Okay, there's a lot to talk about. And that may well take, make 2 paragraphs for you to talk about those things. And then lastly, I've got this. Hayden uses final rhetorical question to reflect on the speaker's limited understanding as a child. The that's where you'd want to talk about the what did I know? What did I know about love's austere and lonely offices? That love doesn't look like what he thought, and he's questioning himself at the end. He's reflecting, he's evaluating how he responded to his father as a child, and seeing now that his father had ways that he communicated love, but he didn't appreciate, recognize, understand. And again, the leaving it at the end in the form of a question has that sort of unanswered, this is a very sad, tragic reality in his relationship with his dad. Okay. All right. So, obviously, if you have questions or if you want to write one of your PEE paragraphs and have me check it or see how you're doing, that's fine. But that should at least help get you started. Again, these are just to be a resource for you, get you started. Remember, you need to write a point at the beginning of each of your PEE paragraphs. Do not start with quotes. Start with a point, okay? And these you could use, and you would get plenty of analysis done. If you write 4 paragraphs with an intro and a conclusion, and these are your 4 points, you will cover the material well. You're going to have to think about which quotes you want to use to support each of these. The structure one's a little bit harder to talk about, like with quotes, but you definitely could use quotes to talk about like the unrecognized form of love, and then you'll talk about structure choices. Okay, so this paragraph wouldn't have as many quotes. You'll be talking more about the whole picture, how the poet has organized, laid out, you know, and you'll want to compare it to what a standard sonnet is, but you have to connect this to meaning, okay? And then of course it has to be connected to the idea of their relationship, and the relationship point is that the father's love was, he was speaking a language that the kid didn't understand, or that was too quiet for him to hear over the anger, but recognized as an adult. Okay, I'll leave you to it.